with Jacob Rees Mogg.
Good morning to you. 3 minutes after 9, Monday, the 18th of February. The clock is ticking down. I look at the front page of one of the newspapers today, the Daily Express, which every day tells us how many days to go, and we're in the threes now, just 39 days to go. So, as is often, if not always the case, a fantastic opportunity to put your calls to Jacob Rees Mogg, who's not just, of course, Conservative MP for North East Somerset, part of this indeed, key mover of this all-important ERG, but European Research Group, just to remind you. But actually, Mr. Rees Mogg, welcome to the studio. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you, sir. I wonder if I can just take you elsewhere. In about an hour's time, we're going to hear something of some importance from some Labour politicians, which could determine the future of the Labour Party, the country, the empire, the world, goodness knows what else. Jacob Rees Mogg, what have you picked up?
Well, only the gossip that there are about 4 Labour MPs who are thinking of going. And it's very important for the Labour Party because these are moderate, capable people, rising stars within the Labour Party.
We speak of Chuka
Umunna, Chris Leslie, Angela Smith are 3 of the 4 names that I've heard.
Is Luciana Berger maybe one of them?
Isn't one that I've heard, but the Labour Party doesn't confide in me.
Jacob Rees Mogg, no.
And they're very capable people, and as I say, rising stars within the party. But they're not Roy Jenkins, Shirley Williams, or David Owen.
You're referring to the old SDP?
Rogers, the old SDP,
back in the
when it
80s.
was 4 cabinet ministers, a former president of the European Council. It was the really big beasts of the Labour Party who were leaving Michael Foot, and now you're losing people who are much more junior. They're not less capable, but they simply haven't got the experience or the clout that I think the Gang of 4 had in 1981.
And they leave just to resign the whip, or they form their own group? You look, it just to me, you've no idea, effectively, your eyes there.
I don't know.
No, and I don't expect you, but you're tuned in, obviously, so I just wondered if you had any more.
But last time it happened, there was the Limehouse Declaration. You and I probably remember them coming out of that house in Limehouse and saying this is what we're doing, and the party came later. So I'd be surprised if they moved to a full-blown party today, but we'll know in under an hour what they're planning and who they are. And it occurs to me that if I were them, I'd be briefing that there are going to be 4 people and then turn up with 20. That they need to make an impact beyond 4 in an hour's time for this to be a success, I would have thought.
OK. And what about divisions lastly within the Conservative Party? Do you march on as one, the Conservative Party?
Divisions within the Conservative Party? I mean, we could not be a happier, more contented band, other than we don't all agree on Europe. Actually, I'm not just joking, that Europe is a very divisive issue across all political colours in the UK, but the Conservative Party otherwise is much more united than the Labour Party. The Labour Party is divided on whether or not you're a Marxist. And that's a really big division. It's a left-right split, and the moderates now seem to be leaving. Within the Conservative Party, yes, of course, there are shades of opinion on how free market you are and so on, but we're all broadly in the same policy areas, other than on Europe.
And lastly, before we go to the calls, Anna Soubry or Sarah Wollaston are not to the Conservative Party what Chuka Umunna is to the Labour Party.
I mean, I've always thought it's important that the Conservative Party is a broad church. I think it's really important that there are people in the Conservative Party who do not have identikit views to me, and that we will win elections in those circumstances. I think there's room for that breadth, and I would be surprised if they left the party. I think they've got strong commitment to the party, and have even said that people like me, I think Anna Soubry said I wasn't a proper Conservative, which would imply that she is very committed to the party, which I think is good news.
Should we take some calls? Lee's in Southend. Lee, you're through to Jacob Rees Mogg. Go ahead. Morning to you.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Jacob.
Good morning, Lee.
On the show. My question is, the Prime Minister repeatedly states that her deal was in the national interest. However, as we've recently seen, her deal was voted down by a large majority. So my question is, why did she sign a deal without the support and agreement prior to signing? And secondly, what change or compromise can she make in order that you and other ERG members accept her deal?
Well, Lee, my concern with the withdrawal agreement is it doesn't meet the commitments given in the Conservative Party manifesto that we wouldn't be out of the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, we wouldn't be out of the Customs Union, and we would have parts of us remaining within the single market, and that is all in the Irish backstop. So the problem with the deal, the bit of the deal that just isn't Brexit, is in the backstop. So if the Prime Minister were to go with the Malthouse Compromise, which has elements within it that Eurosceptics really dislike, such as paying over £39 billion without getting anything clear in return, and remaining as a vassal state for 33 months, if the Prime Minister were to make that change, then I think it's something that would get through Parliament. There is compromise within it from both sides, and that would genuinely be in the national interest. I think Brexit in name only is not in the national interest. I disagree with the Prime Minister's description of her own withdrawal agreement.
Let's go back to Lee. Lee?
I totally agree with Jacob.
Okay.
I voted to leave.
Yep.
I wouldn't like a Brexit in name only, because that's not true. What true Brexit means to me, and probably other members of the 17.4 million people that voted in 2016. Again, I'm quite aghast that she signed a deal, and we're having all these discussions after she signed it, where perhaps we should have had these discussions prior to her signing this deal. And we spent 2 years arguing in Parliament about leaving and remaining, when the vote was we leave, and maybe the 2 years could have been better spent arguing how we leave as opposed to arguing between parties. Yes. And whether we stay or remain.
Let's get Jacob Rees Mogg back in.
Well, I'm in a great deal of agreement with Lee on this, and I think the point that this should have been discussed before people were presented with a fait accompli would have been a very good idea. But with so important an arrangement, deal, the country as a whole needed to be brought into it and persuaded of its virtues, whereas what happened was that one day a 580-page document was unveiled and everyone was expected to jump to and say, oh goodness, that's marvellous. And it didn't work like that, because people took the trouble to read it and discovered that it didn't deliver. And I think Lee's point that these discussions should have taken place first is absolutely right.
All right, we'll move. Lee, thank you. Just to clarify, so that the brilliantly titled Malthouse Compromise could be the way forward, Mr. Rees Mogg?
I think the Malthouse Compromise is the best way forward. It unites the Conservative Party, and if you do that, you then have a majority in the House of Commons, effectively.
Yes.
Once you have done that, I think it helps unite the country, because we would be leaving with a deal. You wouldn't have the potential disjunctions that people talk about from leaving without a deal, but we would also have left the European Union delivering on the manifesto commitment, and even more importantly, on the referendum result. So I think a lot of good things come out of the Malthouse Compromise, and it basically switches the backstop from being a customs union backstop to being a free trade backstop. It doesn't tie you into what you negotiate for the future relationship, but your fallback position is free trade rather than customs union. That's the essential difference.
And just before we move on to the next caller, how concerned are you, we've talked about the Malthouse Compromise, the Yvette Cooper amendment, which is if the Prime Minister doesn't have a meaningful vote, couldn't that effectively delay, nay, deny Brexit? How worried about you about the Cooper amendment?
You're quite right. The Cooper-Bowles amendment is all about stopping Brexit. It's not true to say that it's about a brief delay, because it doesn't set out what would then be discussed. It is an attempt by people who never accepted the referendum result to stymie, to stop, to prevent Brexit. And my fear there, apart from this overturning biggest democratic exercise in our nation's history, is that will be very helpful for more extreme elements in British politics. So where will people go? Having voted to leave, they suddenly find that a few politicians managed to stymie their vote in Parliament, and I think it would be a golden opportunity for Tommy Robinson, and I think the backers of it are deeply irresponsible.
Do you think it has much hope, the Cooper-Bowles amendment?
Well, it was reasonably well defeated last time, and I think since it was defeated, people have had an opportunity to consider the consequences.
Matthew is in Heathrow, and you're through to Jacob Rees Mogg. Matthew, go ahead. Morning to you.
Morning, Nick. Morning, Jacob.
Good morning, Matthew. Thank you for calling.
Great. What it is, it sounds like Labour's about to maybe have a split on Brexit. If you don't get your own way on Brexit, are you actually considering splitting the Conservative Party and actually maybe even joining Nigel Farage's new party?
No. I used to be asked that about joining UKIP, which I was never going to do. I am such a conservative. I'm Tory to my toenails, and therefore I would not be leaving the Conservative Party under any circumstances. It's my party, you see, and therefore why would I give it up to anybody else? So I will remain within the Conservative Party.
Matthew, quick response.
Okay. Yeah, no, I do understand that, but I mean, I think everyone, because of Brexit, if you don't agree with your government, then I think everyone should actually stop playing politics and actually, stand for what they believe in. And if Labour does it, I think really the ERG should actually split off separately as well.
Well, I don't agree at all. I think that the majority of members of the Conservative Party are Eurosceptics and support the broad position taken by the ERG. And, perhaps crucially, we're in line with the Conservative Party manifesto, which was written by none other than the Prime Minister. So we are dutifully backing what the Prime Minister said she intended to do. That some people have changed their minds, I don't think legitimises the change of tack or makes it the official Conservative policy. I think the official Conservative policy is as set out in the manifesto, which is to leave the customs union, the single market, and of course the jurisdiction of the European Court.
Thank you for your call, Matthew. When you mentioned the Prime Minister, Mr. Rees Mogg, there was a story in one of the papers yesterday that some Conservatives are suggesting that they want the Prime Minister gone after the local elections on May the 2nd, and indeed the ERG may be involved in that plotting.
It's complete news to me. I was involved in an effort to have a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister before Christmas. I lost. I'm now supporting the Prime Minister, and I'm not going to get involved in any other plots in relation to the Prime Minister, because I think that would simply not be the right way to behave. So she has my support. I had my go. It failed. That's it.
And she takes you into the next party conference then, which was meant to be the crowning of the new Conservative Party leader, nay Prime Minister.
Crown him with many crowns, the lamb upon his throne.
Jay in Southend. Another call from Southend. Jay, you're on the radio. Go ahead. Morning to you.
Morning. Hello, Mr. Rees Mogg.
Hello, Jay. Thank you for calling.
I'm in my early 20s, so, politics for me is a bit blasé. But I just wondered whether you thought that Brexit was ruined the moment that the Conservative Party allowed a Remainer to stand as Prime Minister once David Cameron left.
Ruined is a harsh word, but I think your analysis has a lot of truth in it. One of the reasons I think...
At the end of the day, Miss May can never do any right, can she? Because people always say, well, she's a Remainer.
Do you know, one of the reasons I thought it was important to have a Leaver as leader of the party and as Prime Minister was because I've always recognised that in a negotiation to leave, compromises would have to be made. And that people who voted leave would have trusted, say, Boris Johnson, stand up and say, look, you all know I wanted to leave. I campaigned very hard to leave, but I think it's important that we spend £39 billion doing X, Y, Z, or whatever it was. And that compromise would have come very well from a Leaver. And that the problem a Remainer has is that any compromise brought forward, Leavers are very suspicious and say, oh, you're only doing that because you never wanted to leave in the first place. And you've often found, it's like Nixon in China, that reforms, changes are best made by people who are known to be coming from a strong position in the other direction. They're the ones who can compromise, whereas the ones who always wanted to compromise are never in a strong enough position to do so. So, Jay, I think your analysis is very accurate.
Jay, a quick response from you.
So what are the chances of us starting from scratch? Theresa May leaving, say, tomorrow, and getting a Leave person in and renegotiating?
I think it's too late for that. Although the EU does negotiate very much at the last minute, I think to start again from scratch with 30, how many days? 39 days left would be ambitious.
Jay, thank you. On this subject, we turn from the Prime Minister to the chief negotiator, who reportedly was overheard in a hotel bar by an ITV news reporter telling colleagues, in the end, Brussels will probably just give us an extension. I'm sure I should know your views on that, your view on that, and indeed your view on Mr. Robbins' suitability for office.
My view on Mr. Robbins is that he is a dutiful civil servant doing what he is told to do by his political bosses. I've never said anything unfavourable about Mr. Robbins. I think he is, from what I know, a highly intelligent and capable man, and it's not his fault that he's carrying out a policy I don't like. And I think one should always be careful.
Can't be that intelligent if he's talking in a bar that's well known to journalists, Mr. Rees Mogg report.
Aha! Very good, Mr. Ferrari. Now, that is where one gets a little bit suspicious as to whether this may or may not have been a way of expressing government policy. Sort of, if you don't do what I say and vote through my terrible withdrawal agreement, well, then I'll get an extension, ho, ho, ho. I don't think a discreet, intelligent, capable civil servant gossips loudly in a bar. And if you read the ITV report, his voice was carrying, that it wasn't so much a question of eavesdropping, it was a bit more like being in a public meeting, that the sort of bursts came forth. Mr. Robbins does not give the impression of being somebody who is loud in a bar, and I would have thought that there was an intention to give a message. But perhaps I'm just unduly suspicious-minded.
The Robbins Memorandum following the Malthouse Compromise, or whatever it might. It goes on and on, Mr. Rees Mogg. Gary in Acton. Gary, let's get back to the questions. You're on the radio. Good morning, Gary.
Hi, you're right.
Yes.
Hello, Gary.
Can I just say thank you, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for all the work you did with the European Research Group, seeing how biased our media is these days.
Thank you very much.
Have another source. Can I just ask a question? Do you think delaying Brexit would be good for Tommy Robs?
Oh, I think delaying Brexit is really about trying to stop Brexit.
You touch on this, so maybe I know you said it, perhaps Gary didn't hear it. Gary, stay with me. I just want you to, because you did briefly touch on the idea. Brexit delayed. Sorry, Brexit delayed is Brexit denied. Jacob
I think that's right. I think the only people who want to delay Brexit are people who never wanted to leave the European Union in the first place. And they want to overturn the referendum result, but they're not brave enough to say that's what they want to do. They hide behind delay, and they come out with all the Project Fear stuff, almost all of which has been shown to be untrue. More and more of it's shown to be fake, and the EU is making its own plans for us to leave and to carry on with systems that make life work. So I think delay is about stopping. And we've been very lucky in this country. We've never had a history of extreme parties doing well in elections. And if you look at continental Europe, you've seen the rise of extreme parties across the continent, and currently Spain is seeing the rise of the far right again for the first time really since Franco. So interesting, important developments, worrying developments in the continent. Why? Because of the disconnect between the elected and the electors. And if we have that same disconnect, then that is the perfect circumstance for extremism to work. And that's not Nigel Farage, who is in the ordinary bounds of British politics. It goes further than him, and that's when you begin to bring in Tommy Robinson. So, Gary, yes, that is what I am concerned about.
Gary, back to you. It wasn't that long ago that France fell in love with Emmanuel Macron, though, who's very much of the European project, isn't he, Mr. Rees Mogg?
Up to a point, Lord Copper. If you look at the French election results, which Macron won, the results of the combined vote of the hard left and the hard right was higher than the vote he got. But in the final round, the hard left, quite understandably, voted for Macron rather than for Miss Le Pen. So you're right in what happened in the end, but the vote for extremist parties was absolutely remarkable.
Quick response from you, Gary.
Yeah, well, he's definitely right about people like the AfD, Five Star in Italy, Fox, like you said, in Spain, Uprising now, and you've got places like Hungary as well. They're just not going to listen to the EU anymore. They're not just going to accept how they're treated. I just want to say as well, the UK is just a great country. You've got diversity, you've got a great standard of living, and like you said about the policies, we get like a far right in England. It's a lot less far right than it is in Europe.
Well, certainly you look like a country like Hungary. I think you would agree. Gary, thank you. Peter, to you in a moment. We talk about diversity. Mr. Rees Mogg, I know you will have been as sickened if you've had an opportunity to see the story that I'm showing you now on the front page of The Guardian, which is the picture of the front door of an apartment block in Salford, where a gentleman from the Democratic Republic of Congo moved in with his 10-year-old son, and within days the slogan "No Blacks, No Blacks" had been written in whitewash on the door, almost taking us back to the dark days, I didn't know, pun intended, of the 60s or 70s. Now, he's saying in part Brexit has unleashed that sort of racist sentiment. How would you respond to that?
No, I don't think there's any evidence for that. I mean, that is so shocking.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd had sight.
I hadn't seen that. The Guardian not being the paper I turn to first every morning. But that is criminal. It should be prosecuted. But there is a tendency to say every bad news story is because of Brexit, and every good news story is in spite of Brexit. I don't think there's any evidence for that being Brexit linked at all.
People will say there was a hike in hate crime, other instances after the referendum vote. Although some of it was found, was, for instance, of a Spanish restaurant. It was actually an attempted burglary. It was nothing to do with the fact that it was owned by Spaniards. Right, one has to tread carefully here.
And there was an issue with a Polish crime that was nothing to do with Brexit and was initially broadcast as being entirely a Brexit
and the Wiltshire
issue.
Landlady who had a Welsh flag as part of a bow and arrow competition, and that apparently was a hate crime. So one has to tread carefully, but there is a sentiment abroad, as I'm sure you understand, Mr. Rees Mogg, that is what might have happened in this country.
But I don't think there's any solid evidence for it. So just because some people who didn't want to leave then blame everything that they don't like on Brexit doesn't mean that it is caused by Brexit. We didn't lose 2 out of the 3 test matches against the West Indies because of Brexit.
Did BMI close? Possibly. The airline, albeit a rather small airline, and one has to say perhaps not brilliantly run in that most of its aircraft were less than half full or half empty. Is that as a result of Brexit? Ford possibly moving production out of the UK, possibly because of Brexit. I can go on and on and on, Mr. Rees.
You can. Do badly run companies blame Brexit? Yes, they do.
Even Ford?
I wasn't talking about Ford. No. The airlines go bust the whole time. It is the nature of airlines that. Why is that? Because they're highly capital intensive and they are very susceptible to small movements in capacity utilisation. So if your 60% capacity utilisation is your break even, at 61% you're coining money. At 1% is enormously profitable. 59% your bank is coming after you. And that's why airlines historically have had such a poor reputation and likelihood of going bankrupt, particularly the smaller ones. So it's very hard to link that to Brexit. And if you look at Airbus, which made a great song and dance about Brexit, they were quite careful to say that the A380's cancellation was nothing to do with Brexit. And actually the problems for Airbus is that it made the wrong investment decision and Boeing made the right investment decision. Boeing decided to go for smaller, very fuel efficient aircraft.
The plane is too big. That's the bottom line, isn't it? The one they were building.
Too big. It's like Concorde. That it was very dependent on large government subsidies, including from the UK government, and you end up doing what bureaucrats think is the right idea, whereas Boeing ended up doing what passengers want, which is a small aircraft. And don't we all want to fly point to point rather than hub to hub and then on? That we like one flight rather than several. And Boeing made the right investment decision, whatever it is now, 20 years ago. Airbus didn't.
What about Ford, Mr. Rees Mogg?
What about
Ford? Move production out of the case, possibility deeply worrying the Welsh First Minister said this as a result, possibly job cuts.
Ford moved actual manufacturing of cars out of the UK ages ago, long before Brexit. That these are international companies and the car industry has suffered from a whole host of problems. Increasing regulation, whole new swathe of regulations that came in last year. Complete about-face on diesel, so that diesel was what we were all told to buy, and now we're all told
product of the devil now.
We're going to be punished for having it. And it is one of the great disgraces of public policy, actually, that people knew that particulates and nitrous oxides killed people in the carbon dioxide.
When you say people, you mean advisors?
I mean government officials.
Yes, I mean not me. I didn't, because I bought one. I didn't know. You mean that those who were in the know did not pass on? Yeah.
Those who were in the know knew that there were these risks, and they simply ignored them because they were concentrating on being the good boys of Kyoto rather than one actually created pollution in cities. It is a great public scandal, and people who are losing out are by and large less well-off people with older cars who are now being hit. They're going to be hit desperately in London in pretty short order for making a decision they were encouraged to take by the state. But that lies at the heart of the problems of the car industry, because there's been a collapse in demand for diesel engines, and they're all geared up for manufacturing diesel engines.
Back to the calls, that's what we're about. Peter's in Chorley in Lancashire. Peter, go ahead, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Jacob. Can
Good morning. You hear me okay? I can, loud and clear. Thank you for calling.
Brilliant. I want to talk about universal credit. I have worked within a food bank, and I've also been a recipient of universal credit. As we all know, the current upsurge in demand for such of the services at food banks has been associated with a transition from job seekers' allowance to universal credit, the so-called rollover period. However, there is also the transitions from full-time, part-time employment onto universal credit, and people coming from further and higher education, coupled with the problems of sanctions, both targeted and in some cases malicious, whereby benefits have been effectively converted into long-term debts. Considering all these things...
And if we can move to the question now, Peter. Yes.
Pardon?
If we can move to the question, isn't it about time universal credit? What was the question going to be?
Isn't it about time universal credit was either scrapped or radically overhauled?
Thank you very much, Peter.
On Friday, I went to the Bath Job Centre, which, although it's not in my constituency, serves North East Somerset. And it was really inspirational to talk to people there and the amazing work that they do and are able to do because of the flexibility universal credit gives them, and what they are doing to bring together various parts of the job centre to help people with other problems that aren't necessarily employment related but lead to employment problems. So people with disabilities, people with health issues beyond those, drug addictions and so on, and combining together with much greater flexibility than they had under the old system to try and ensure that people have the right package to help them do what they can. I think the issue on universal credit is that it was rolled out and is being rolled out slowly, so that problems in it can be addressed as they emerge. But you do admit
it did start badly.
I accept there were some problems with it.
Even Amber Rudd has said agrees that.
Particularly in relation to trying to delay the payments and the week without payments. That's all been changed. People can now get money up front. They can get it within a week in normal circumstances and on the same day.
Are you sure?
If they need to, yes. That's one of the important changes that has come in. There was an error in converting some disability benefits, which meant people were losing out by significant amounts of money. There is a statutory instrument going through Parliament at the moment that puts that right, and that people who have been underpaid will get all their money back. So things are being put right because universal credit's being rolled out cautiously and prudently, which is the right way to make such a big change, because it is a fundamental change to the benefit system. But if I can just reiterate,
it was meant to be up and running by 2017. Of course, it won't be till 2020. We can't laud this as one of the greatest triumphs, can we, Mr. Rees Mogg?
Oh, yes, we can, actually, because...
Sorry, it was due to be up by April 2017. It'll be up by the end of 2023.
Yes.
Good job you're not running the railways, Mr. Rees Mogg.
No, I'm going to dispute your point strongly for once, Mr. Ferrari, because it is much better that governments get things right than they introduce them according to a deadline. If last year the deadline for having a new timetable for the railways had been delayed, it might have been implemented with fewer problems. If on HS2 we said, well, look, it's gone massively over budget, let's stop the thing, that might be the right decision to make. Setting timescales and then, regardless of the evidence, sticking to them is a sign of weak government rather than of good government. Getting a system that works is much more important than having it in by a specific date.
Want to fit in a final question from Helen in Haywards Heath. Helen of Haywards Heath. Helen, go ahead. Good morning.
Yeah, hi.
Hello.
Not having any legal background, why does a man with such draconian attitudes in Parliament in the 21st century is still allowed to be a peer of the realm?
I've got a note. Is this Sir Christopher Chope? Is this? Well, I've got a note on the screen. That's all right, Helen. That's my job. You speak of Sir Christopher Chope, who, of course, by utilising, I think, a fairly, I'm not sure, arcane parliamentary procedure, was able to stop a bill going forward as regards FGM. And there is a feeling now that, well, your Conservative colleague perhaps should be questioned over his knighthood. Jacob Rees Mogg.
Oh no, this is the government's fault. This is not Sir Christopher's fault.
Had he not said, what does one have to say? Object? Is that what?
But government controls the parliamentary timetable. There is time to pass this bill properly. What Sir Christopher was stopping was a bill being passed without any debate. Parliament exists to debate laws. We can't pass laws that affect people's lives without them being considered. This was an attempt to short-circuit the legislative process. The government should have made time for the bill, which it is now going to do. The bill is a good bill. It ought to be on the statute book. But parliamentary procedures should not be abused by governments that... Would
you have said object?
I wouldn't have said object.
Why so, then? You just argued favourably
because I support the bill. But actually,
hang on, Mr. Rees Mogg. Either you support the application of parliamentary...
No, he's entitled to do it. He's fair to do it because...
He's fair?
He's fair. The government didn't make the time for this bill. And then when he says object, the government says, oh, it's all his fault. No, it's not. The government controls the parliamentary timetable. What was this bill doing, being a private member's bill? Why wasn't it a government bill being brought forward to deal with FGM?
Isn't the most important thing the protection is afforded to young women?
Absolutely. And we spend... days. We're going to have Thursday debating nothing very much this week. The whole day could have been devoted to the bill. We have days of general debate discussing nice-to-do things with no consequence. There is plenty of parliamentary time to do this. The government chose not to.
Do you think this is when you become more politician than person, Mr. Rees Mogg?
No,
I know in your heart you're a decent bloke, but and I appreciate we must have duty of care towards parliamentary procedure. But heaven's sake, look after the girls.
Absolutely, but the government should have done this. You see, law is very important because law creates criminal offences.
Yes.
You could get to prison if you break this law.
Yeah.
And surely that should be debated to make sure it's properly written.
But you wouldn't have said object.
I wouldn't have said object, as it happens.
So he was wrong to say object?
I think he was entitled to say object, and it is no, it is important to defend people who do things that you wouldn't choose to do.
All right.
If we lived in a world where anything people did that didn't have my imprimatur was banned, it would be a very peculiar world.
Well, at least Somerset would win the cricket championship every year, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't that be marvellous? If only we could do it once, I'd be happy. So, Helen, I wouldn't be too harsh on Sir Christopher. I would criticise the government for not bringing forward this legislation properly.
I need a quick final word. We're over time, but one person who wants to come to this country and another who wants to leave. First off, Shabina Begum, the so-called runaway jihadist bride. Jacob Rees Mogg, should she be permitted back to this country?
I think under international obligations she is entitled to come back. She hasn't got any other nationality, and you can't make people stateless. I think one should have a certain human sympathy for her. She was only 15 when she went away, at which point she was married and had a child. Most girls who are married at 15 we think are abused, we don't think are terrorists. Now, when she comes back, if she comes back, of course she should be questioned, and of course if she's broken the law should take its course. But 15-year-old girls who are brainwashed, married off, inevitably therefore assaulted, because it's illegal to be married under the age of 15 and to have a child pregnant under 16. And therefore there ought to be some sympathy for her. She is not...
Although she shows no remorse.
No, and that is clearly a problem. And clearly if she comes back, she should be watched to ensure that she's not involved in terrorism, and the relevant orders should be used, and if necessary, she should be prosecuted if she'd broken the law. She was a 15-year-old when she went away.
And someone who wants to leave the country is Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who is Britain's wealthiest man. It is reported that he made £42 million a day last year. Look, credit to him, the man went to a grammar school, he's very clever. Surely some money is enough at some point. You can't need to make more than 42 million quid a day.
Well, it's a useful lesson for governments to understand that money is mobile, and that if tax rates are too high, people will move their money abroad. They will leave the country. And it's basically the Laffer curve, isn't it? That you need to set tax rates at a rate that maximises the income that comes in for the government. Now, most people are happy to stay and are broadly happy with the tax rates that we've got, though I think they are at the limit of acceptability. If you look at the percentage of GDP collected in tax, it's about the highest level for 50 years, particularly on current projections. So you always have to be careful with tax rates not to kill the golden goose, because the golden geese can fly.
Jacob Rees Mogg, thank you for appearing here on LBC. We're way over time. News is next.
A group of Labour MPs is to make an announcement in the next half hour amid rumours they're about to split from the party. There have been disagreements over Jeremy Corbyn's approach to Brexit and the party leadership's handling of anti-Semitism allegations, and Labour MPs